Rose was used to the stares from children. She didn't really mind them as she knew it was just childhood curiosity. What she couldn't stand was the looks and even taunts she would get from adults. People could be so cruel. She didn't need reminding of what she looked like. She had brown, curly hair and a pretty smile, but no one seemed to pay attention to those things. Rose was in an electric, motorized chair. She was missing her left arm, with just a small stump left at the shoulder. She was also missing her right leg, all the way up to where the top of her thigh should be. There was no indication of scarring anywhere on what was left of her body. She was just missing 2 limbs. People always wanted to know how she lost her limbs. Was it a birth defect? The result of a tragic accident? It may have been tragic, but it was no accident. She never told anyone the truth. It wasn't like anyone would believe her anyway. Rose had grown up a normal, happy little girl. Her family had immigrated from Mexico to the US a few years before she was born. Her family was undocumented, leaving a stigma cast upon them. Still, they were the most giving, loving, and hardworking people she knew. They never had much money, but they always had each other. Rose was 19 when her mom developed cancer. It was very treatable, as long as you had the money to pay for the surgery and chemotherapy, but they didn't. Getting assistance was nearly impossible since her mom was in the US illegally. They sold everything they owned, worked around the clock, borrowed when they could, but it wasn't enough. Rose's mom was going to die, and it was completely preventable. Rose had been truly desperate when she got the scarlet envelope invitation. There was a promise that a rich benefactor would pay for her mom's treatment for an unspecified price that Rose would be able to pay. She had no choice. She met up with her mysterious benefactor. She was brought to a mansion that looked like it had been carved from marble. It was encased in a giant gate and surrounded by some of the most beautiful gardens Rose had ever seen. She was driven up to the front door, where someone was already waiting to open her car door and escort her into the massive building. She was brought to an ornate sitting room, with giant paintings ordaining the walls and a roaring fire and a beautiful fireplace. In the room was a sofa, a matching chair, and a small but expensive table in between. She was invited to sit on the sofa. Tea and scones were served and left on the table. There were 2 cups. The owner of the second cup walked through the door. She was beautiful, with blue eyes and fair skin. She looked to be in her early 50s. She had short blonde hair and was in a white turtleneck pantsuit with white boots and white gloves to match. She walked with a noticeable limp and took a seat in the chair across from Rose. By the end of this meeting, you will have many questions. I apologize in advance for not being able to answer them, she said, her hand shaking as she lifted her cup of tea to her lips. Please, call me Kay. I have studied your case, Rose, she continued. A sorrowful story indeed, but fear not. I can easily pay for your mother's treatment and pay off all debts your family has acquired. But first, I need a few things from you. Rose was flabbergasted. What could she possibly have that this regal-looking woman needed? You see, said Kay, I am going to share some things with you that you will not believe at first, but assure you are very true. She took another sip of tea. I've lived 1,000 lifetimes, all thanks to donors like yourself. The way she said donors left a chill going up Rose's spine. I know the secret to immortality. I'm afraid I can't share the details, but I am one of the lucky few who may choose to live forever. Now I know you think I'm crazy. She was correct. But remember that regardless of my sanity, I have the money to save your mother's life. The woman made a fair point. It didn't matter if she was a whack job. She was Rose's only hope. Now, Kay continued, immortality is a messy business. There's no fountain of youth, only science privy to very few people. Like a car, I can run forever, but only if all my parts are constantly replaced. To keep me breathing, I need new lungs. To keep me speaking, I need new vocal cords. That's where my donors come in. I could just take the parts I need without the donor's permission, but that has never sat right with me. Instead, I buy the parts I need. It seems more fair, she said. And what about your heart? Asked Rose. She couldn't believe that she was playing along with this, but the stakes were too high. There are certain parts of the body that cannot be taken without killing a person. Who sells you their life? Kay paused before sighing sadly. Clearly, you have never met the mother of a dying child. People will give everything for some causes. It is a sad business indeed, one I don't like to think about. Guilt was plain on Kay's face. It made Rose realize that regardless of Kay's crazy reasoning, she had killed people for money. Rose was sitting across from a murderer. She wanted to leave. She stood up and walked briskly towards the door when a voice called out, "Don't forget about your mother." Rose stopped. Her eyes filled with tears. She was going to give a great sacrifice for her mom. Her mom would have done the same. She turned around and sat back down on the couch. "What do you want from me?" "Your right arm and left leg," Kay said bluntly. Rose felt sick. "Both yours and your mother's medical bills will be paid for. Your family will also get quite a bit of money that they can live off of for a long time. Will you do it? Will you make the sacrifice for your mother?" Instead of answering, Rose asked a question of her own. "Why those specific limbs? A left one and a right one, I mean. I like to keep things balanced. Soon I will find another girl the same height as you and retrieve her other limbs." She paused before saying, "You will always think of me as evil. I'm certainly selfish, but I argue that I'm not evil. This is just a trade. I help you and you help me," she finished. Rose looked down at her hands and then looked back at this psycho woman. It was sick, but she didn't have a choice. She nodded lightly. Kay smiled and clapped her hands together. "Excellent. You made the right choice. I have a specialist here that will bring us both into surgery right now. But first, I'd like to shake hands on a deal well done." Rose stood up shakily before extending her hand. Kay took her gloves off and shook her hand. With dawning horror, Rose realized that the skin of her hand was dark chocolate brown. This hand didn't belong to her. It was all true. Rose let go and threw up over the expensive carpet. Kay didn't even blink, obviously used to that reaction. "Don't worry, I will have it cleaned." That was the last day that Rose had her right arm and left leg. She had cried for days after surgery, but Kay had kept her word. Her mom made a full recovery, and her family unexpectedly came into money. Of course, they were horrified by the condition that they found Rose in when she returned home, but she refused to speak about the experience she had gone through. She made a choice to never speak of it for her own sanity, and she had kept that choice for the last 15 years. She never saw the woman known as Kay again, and that was perfectly fine with her. But to this day, every time she saw someone missing an eye or a limb, she couldn't help but question if the story they shared about their missing part was the truth.